Boom. About 16, 17 years ago, something like that, we're coming out of this church service and I'm shaking some hands and greeting people, making some connections. And Michelle comes up and she's like, hey, there's somebody out in the courtyard area that wants to talk to you. So I'm like, all right. So make a little time for them, go out and talk to this person. And like, hey, you know, I'm really nervous. Something's come up. And I'm like, okay. So I'll do that thing where I whisper the prayer, God, guide me through this. And it's like, something's come up and I can tell it's a really big deal to this individual. So I'm like, all right, slow down, pace yourself. Just tell me what's going on. We'll see what we can do. Like, okay, so there's this guy over there. You see that tree? And I'm like, yeah. And it's like, there's this guy over there and he needs some help. I'm like, all right, so what's the problem? He was like, I feel like I need to help him. I'm like, all right, what's the problem? And he said, I don't know how. I don't know how. So I spent a few minutes just walking him through this process of what it means to think, I need to help in this scenario, this situation. This setup requires my attention. Not only do I feel that it requires my attention, I know that it does. And I know that it does because it doesn't feel like it's of me. There's something else going on inside of me that's outside of me saying, yeah, you take some steps forward. Put one foot in front of the other, walk into that situation and provide the help. But I've kept that with me over the years because I think the question of how is directly related to the idea of discipleship. Is that rain or me? Okay, all right, good deal. Just making sure it wasn't the mic. So what we're doing with this series called is that we're spending 4 weeks walking through the idea of discipleship. The first 2 weeks was geared toward being disciples, and that's a focus on what is best and then straining toward what is ahead. And this week and next week, we'll look at what it means or what it requires of us to actually make disciples. And we're intentionally choosing not to use some of those big dog texts like Matthew 28 when we're talking about discipleship. Instead, we're walking through Paul's letter to the church at Philippi, what you and I know as Philippians, because Paul is in prison, and when he writes to this group of Christ followers, you get the impression that he's putting some meat and flesh on this skeletal structure we call discipleship. And he focuses upon being and making. So when it comes to making a disciple, I bet if we polled this group right here, so convinced that if we polled you all, you would say it was so much easier to be a disciple than to make a disciple. I bet you could give me some really good, not excuses, but really good reasons why making a disciple just hasn't been a part of your life. And I think that those would be extremely valid. So when it comes to the question, how? Well, Paul spends a little time actually addressing that. Oh, it's not working. You all can't hear me? Oh, it's not rain. All right. I thought it was me. Okay, so we're spending some time looking at what Paul says because he gives us some really good substance, not just saying go and make disciples or hey, go and be a disciple, but really what this looks like in a very practical play out. And sometimes the practicality is actually painful because it calls us to action. So if you're here this morning and you've got that question, well, yeah, make disciples. I think that's a part of my life. I think that's something I should do. I know the church is about that, but my question too is just like the guy 16 years ago. How? How do I make that a part of my life? Well, Paul is going to really speak into that. And when he comes to Philippians, he comes to chapter 2, and he works this scenario out where it's like if something's going on in your life and some stuff that's beneficial. So if you've actually experienced any joy from being united with Christ,
or the love that you have experienced from Christ, if you've really internalized that, if that fellowship or being involved in Christian community is really making a difference in your life. And you can see there in verses 1 and 2, if this is clicking for you, this idea of Jesus or this church thing, if it's making sense and actually adding value to your life, then, and he says, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having this shared lifestyle, being one in the way you think of things, being one in spirit. And he ends with that idea of being one in purpose. And after spending some time with this, being involved in the church for a couple of decades, I'm totally convinced that I'm onto something here. I think I'm on to where this breaks down. I'm actually totally convinced that I'm onto something here. Here's where this idea of unity, or if, then, and being one in purpose, here's where it breaks down. Some of you are extremely incarnational, and some of you are extremely invitational. When we talk about incarnation, we talk about Jesus becoming flesh, moving into the neighborhood, being involved in the life of humanity so he really knows how to help. Some of you can go and be. It doesn't matter the scenario or the setup. It doesn't matter the issue or the person. It doesn't matter the group or the danger. You know how to go and be. You can be incarnational in the lives of other people. It's just secondhand to you. It's so easy. And then some of you, not so much. Instead, you're really good at saying, okay, that person, they need someone. They need me or they need us. And you're not going to go and be, but you're going to say, come and see. You're involved in something that's really cool, and it's changing lives, and you're going to be able to invite people into that. You're not necessarily going to do some of the work of going and being, but you're going to say, come and see, and let me help you get plugged in. And I think that natural difference is where that starts to fizzle when it comes to being one in spirit and purpose. So when we're talking about incarnational or invitational, this idea of making disciples, what I want you to focus on is a theory and practice. Because again, if we polled us, I bet some of you are very theoretical, and then some of you are very practical when it comes to this. I saw this theory play out a long time ago, doing a little research, and apparently some people can play music by ear. And apparently some people can play music by studying it and reading music. And apparently I can't do either. I'm just no good at this, so I don't get it. It comes not secondhand, it's a force for me to try to learn music. But there's a theory to it, and you may disagree with this if you're into this or if you've done your own research, but what I've dug up in the research is that when it comes to theory and people playing by ear, there's actually this idea where they hear it and they're able to replicate it, but they don't necessarily understand it. And then the people who read the music actually understand the technicalities. I think it works that way in the Christian life too. There's just some people who, they know the text. They know the message. And they teach it. And they teach it well. But when it comes to connecting, not so much. And then some people just naturally, you're involved in other people's lives. You gravitate toward people and they gravitate toward you. There's this deal where you play the Christian song by ear. And then some of us know it very technically. So several years ago, I'm in this church service, and at the end, we're going to play a special song. And it's a kind of one of those fifth Sunday deals where people can say, hey, I want to hear this, and you play it and everything. So we've got these hymnals, and it's one of these churches where you know what song you're going to sing. I bet some of you can relate to this. You've got the blue hymnals or the red hymnals. You know what I'm talking about? Or if you were really special, you had green hymnals also. So it's in one of those setups, and we're going to sing a song by request, and the person playing the piano at the time read music like crazy, super brilliant, super technical. Well, the song requested wasn't in either of the books. So this individual playing the piano said, wait, I guess we can sing that, but how are we going to know what notes to play? And this guitarist says, oh, that's not a problem. I'm going to play the notes for you. Now, some of you understand where the lady was coming from, and some of you understand where the guitarist was coming from. I don't understand either. No, just kidding. Well, I really don't get the dynamic, but it's interesting how some people just naturally know, naturally hear, naturally know what to do, and then some of us require something else. There's a theory behind making disciples, and it's a theory that every single one of us, whether you like music theory or not, this is a theory that every single follower of Jesus Christ has to wrap our minds around. We have to become familiar with this. Even if it's a lifelong process of learning, we have to start with the theory of why you and I should even consider making a disciple. And it comes from Philippians chapter 2, which is what we're walking through. But Paul makes this point. Before we get there, have you seen this rock star? Has anybody seen this? Oh my gosh, this is fantastic, and it just drives the point home. This little fella is singing, "You Are My Sunshine." And if you've seen the video, he goes through like one verse, right? "You are my sunshine," typical tune and everything. You see he's got his guitar right there, and I've got an electric guitar, and I see this, and it's cute, but it also makes me sick because I'm still struggling to learn these power chords because I love that hard sound. And then I see this video that's got thousands and hundreds of thousands of views, and this little fella just sings, "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine," like that right there. It's got his guitar, then says, "Oh, play it faster." And then it kicks in with this remix, and he's got his guitar and he's just jamming to it. It's amazing. Go watch the video. It's super cute, super cool, and it drives home that point that sometimes from a very early age, you just know which direction you're going to be. Is it more theoretical or more practical? And it's not just music. I mean, I think about leadership. Are leaders born, or are they built? Or cooking? Use a recipe, or just a little pinch of this, dash of that. Oh, I remember when I used to make this with my mom. The recipe's just in my heart. Or athletes, natural, or are they nurtured? So this idea of this stuff making sense starts with the premise of where we are, and are we theoretical or practical? But I want you to know that when it comes to following Jesus and making disciples, we all have to understand the theory. So when Paul says, if you've got any benefit from this, you've got to make my joy complete, and you've got to be one in spirit and purpose, whether you're incarnational or invitational. And here's why that's really important. And here's why I hate handheld mics. I can't open this bad boy. Somebody want to come up here and hold this for me? Just kidding. So listen to this theory, and I'm curious afterward if something really gets your attention with this. I'd love to touch base with you after the service, but just listen to this language. Right after Paul says, be one in spirit and purpose, he says, don't do anything out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, you want to look around at the people in your life, your circle of influence, and consider them better than yourself. Now, if you're incarnational, that may make sense. If you're invitational, maybe not so much. But there's a theory behind that, and the question would be, why? When I look around and lock eyes with people, would I even considering them being better than myself? So, verse 5, and listen to this language. Because your attitude, not just the behavior, but the attitude, the way you're thinking through this, the way you're connecting with this theory, your attitude should be the same as that of Jesus Christ. Well, what was his attitude? Well, he was in the very nature God. But he didn't consider equality with God something to hold on to, something to grasp. But instead, he made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in the appearance of a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. So the theory behind making disciples, the theory behind making sure that whether it's incarnational for you or invitational for you, you're leaning into that is because your attitude should reflect the attitude of Christ, who literally considered every single one of us in this room better than himself. Took on our nature to understand and perceive so that he could offer what was best in our lives. And there's a natural segue from that into the practical component of making a disciple. So the theory is you understand what Jesus is all about and what he's done for us. Well, what does that look like in our lives? Well, Jesus took an actual interest in the betterment of your life. He was genuinely interested in your life and my life. So when it comes to the practical play out of this, well, what does that look like? I got to experience this about 2 weeks ago. So the fam had a great idea. I don't know who came up with this idea, but there's 5 of us in the house, and the idea was we were all going to make our own individual playlist on Spotify. So here were the rules. You choose 10 songs, and it has to be from a specific genre, and you choose 10 songs, and hopefully the bands or the artists are different. So you choose 10 songs, then you share the playlist in the group text thread that we have. Then the other 4 people have to listen to your playlist, and then they have to judge and assess the songs from 10 being their least favorite to number 1 being their favorite. Then you have to write a few sentences as to why you ordered them that way, share how you connected or didn't connect with the song, and then we're going to meet up on a Friday night and share that. So we met up on a Friday night, and we're going through this, and it was so interesting. It took us about an hour and a half. So what we would do is, if we started with Michelle, it'd be like, all right, so Sophie would go, and she would say, this was my least favorite song. This was number 10, and here's why. Then Christian would share it, I would share it, Bella. We'd do that, then we'd go to number 9, number 8, and so forth. Then we'd switch to Christian from Michelle and so forth. It took us about an hour and a half to get through that. But it was so interesting to listen to the song selection. And it was so interesting to listen to how other people connected with that. And then when the person who created the playlist shared their connection with that song, to listen to how that made sense. And it was just this beautiful time of getting an in-depth look at some of the stuff that people that's in your life, in my life, they connect with. And how certain things make sense. And how they think about the stuff that they're interacting with. What's important to them. It was amazing to hear some of these songs. It was fantastic, especially when the kids would dip back into the 80s and bring up a really cool song, which I didn't know they would. It was fantastic. It was awesome. And you could just feel the genuine interest in each other's lives. So when it comes to practically playing out like this idea, rather consider others better than yourselves, the theory, how? Like practically, how do you do that? Because it's not so natural to some of us. Well, Paul goes on in verse 4 and he says, look not only to your own interests, but to the interests of others. And that's your first step toward making a disciple. You are literally looking toward the interest of another person, how they connect with life, what's important to them, what's going on in their world. And you take a genuine interest in that. You know what, Madison Hills? You do that really well as a group. As a church, we're on fire with that. Let me throw a couple of numbers on the screen. 195. So we wanted to collect some macaroni and cheese. We got 195 boxes of that stuff to give to Grace now. Fantastic. Well done. Also, the second number, this is our total in change, okay? In change when we filled the baby bottles up. $1,234.32. You putting change in the baby bottles. Is that cool or what? So, yeah, fantastic. So I was talking with Sarah at the pregnancy center, and she actually told me this number is up. It's $400 more than last year. Fantastic. I feel that as a whole, Madison Hills genuinely cares about other people. So if this is your first time with us, or maybe the second time, and you're just kind of sorting things out, I want you to know that you are seated around a group of people who will take a genuine interest in your life. It's beautiful here. It's one of the reasons I love being the pastor here. So let me just step over here for 1 second. Got my email up here. Here's something I want you to do for me. I was thinking about these numbers and the way that you're just genuinely interested in the lives of other people and how you take a genuine interest in what's going on. So here's what I want you to do. Take my email, and if you have a story or a thought to share about why you love being here at Madison Hills, will you share that with me? I would love to read through those and see what some common themes are, or some of the reasons that you're really connected and rooted here at this particular local church. I'd just love to know those stories and where your heart is with that. So send me those, and I'll probably work some of them into an upcoming series that we're doing about why I love my church. And the focus won't be overkill on us, it'll be really emphasized upon Jesus and his mission. But I'd love to hear some of the stories about what you just love about what God is doing at Madison Hills Christian Church. Fair? Okay, let me leave you with this too before we move on. So in this section of Philippians, when Paul's writing to when he's writing to the Philippians, he actually brings in a guy and references this guy named Timothy. Now, Paul was heavily involved in Timothy's life, kind of a spiritual father, if you will. And it's interesting when you read some of the letters written to Timothy. Timothy is outlined as a guy who was maybe anxious or timid or not living out his purpose as he should be, even though he came from a line and a life of faith. That was the legacy being passed down into Timothy's life, faith. And Timothy may not have been living up to that. You can see that in Paul's writings to him. So it's interesting how Paul took a genuine interest in the life of Timothy. And now Timothy is being referenced in Philippians chapter 2. After Paul gives the theory about why we should even consider making disciples, and then he starts giving us a practical play out of how, looking to the interest of other people, he actually writes to these guys in chapter 2 and he says, I'm going to send Timothy to you for one particular reason. He will take a genuine interest. He'll have a genuine concern for what's going on at the church at Philippi. That's at the core of making a disciple, where you are genuinely interested in the life of someone else. Now, let me push it just a little farther and tell you how this practically plays out, but a very important, maybe a critical component to this, and it's the idea of proximity. Proximity. Totally convinced that proximity changes things. For example, take a hot topic issue. Take something going on in your life that you have a stance on and bring that home. Let one of your children, whether smaller or maybe an adult, get caught up in that hot topic issue. I bet it changes things. I bet it changes the way you're thinking about it, the way you're interacting with it, the way you're interacting with someone who is heavily involved in whatever issue that you have a stance on. Proximity changes things, and it should. So this guy here, his name is Cliff, and he's all over social media. He goes and has been going to college campuses for years and has these really, really good debates with collegiate students centered around faith. And it's this open-ended thing where they're in a little courtyard and people can come along and they can ask Cliff anything. Anything to do with Jesus, church, Christianity in terms of history, historical context, and they'll talk and they'll debate. And sometimes it gets a little heated, a little charged dialogue going on, but he's very, very respectful of these students, and he gives them phenomenal responses. I didn't always feel that way. I saw Cliff on social media about 3 years ago. The first couple of videos I saw, I was like, nah, not interested. About 6 months ago, my daughter, Sophie, comes into a room with this energy, and she says, hey, you ever seen this guy? And she shows me this picture. I was like, yeah, I have. And I'm like, you ever, in one of those moments, if I'm being real here, it's like, you kind of hope she didn't like him too? You ever in one of those situations where you hope it's this way so you can get a little jab in, or maybe a little gossip or something like that? It's just human nature, right? It's how we do things. Well, she was like, I love him. And then she tells me several ways that she's connected with what this guy is saying. I started looking at Cliff a lot differently. And now I follow him and I listen to his teachings. And it was so humbling for me to think, my daughter, is benefiting from this in a powerful, tangible way. Proximity changes everything, as it should. And proximity is so important when it comes to making a disciple. Because proximity will put you in the realm of being genuinely interested in someone's life. So it'll put you in their life. You'll be involved in their life. You'll be around in their life. It won't just be some passing comment. It won't just be this shot at hopeful evangelism. No, you'll want to spend time with them. You'll want to know what makes them tick. You'll start really looking to their interests as well. So if Sophie's interested in this guy and it's beneficial, I'm coming alongside of that. So here's what I mean. Jesus told multiple stories in Luke 15, and most of you would know that as the parable of the prodigal son. But there's actually 3 stories in Luke 15. And he tells these 3 stories about something that was lost. All 3 of these stories, something is lost. The first story, there's a coin, and it's lost. In the second story, there's a sheep, and it's lost. Third story, there's a son, and the son is lost. And when you read through these stories, it's interesting how it was just one, though. It was just one coin. The lady in the story had 10. She only lost 1. What's the big deal? In the story of the sheep, there were 100 sheep. The shepherd only lost 1. What's the big deal? In the story of the family, the prodigal son, the son left. He had another son. What's the big deal? The son chose to go. And you read these stories and it's just one. And that's what I would remind you. It's just one. So the idea of making disciples, that whole mission is not on your shoulders alone. So if you're thinking, how do I do this? Start with one. One person. And you notice this story? The lady had 10 coins. The shepherd had 100 sheep. The father had 2 sons. And what happens? This lady loses a coin, and the text tells us she swept the whole house frantically looking for it. It was her coin. Proximity. The shepherd had 99 sheep, or 99 that stayed. 1 was lost, gone. He leaves the 99 to go find the 1 because of proximity. It was his sheep. And the son's gone, so it wrecks the father. So when the son comes back, what does he do? He throws a party. And he says, whatever happened in your past is done with. Let's start the future together because it was his son. Proximity changes everything, and you, through proximity, could change one person's life. So start by making disciples by one person. And I bet if you were really open and honest right now, I guarantee you every single person in this room would have one person that comes to mind that you could start with. One person. And if the proximity is not there, is the potential for proximity there? Could you be the one who initiates the relationship? And it might require you to do so. And it might require you to be the one who cultivates the relationship. But the closer you get, the more opportunities are going to arise for you to make a disciple out of this person. I want you to think of this too, how proximity changes everything. Notice Jude 22 and 23. Jude's only one chapter, so verse 22 and verse 23. Notice this language. There'll be some people in your life that they doubt. Okay, show mercy to them. See, proximity, not only does it change things, it changes how you understand, how you need to be involved in a specific person's life. So there's someone in your life that you love or that you have an interest in, and they doubt this stuff that we're all about. Give them some mercy. Still cultivate the relationship, but give them some space. Others, snatch them from the fire. I love that imagery. There was one time in my teenage years, I remember I was working on this job, and the job may have had the potential to go somewhere, but there was some stuff going on with people behind the scenes that I had no clue because I was just a teenager. And I remember going and clocking in. I'm on this shift, and it was during the summer, and about 5 or 10 minutes later, my dad shows up. And the only thing he said to me was, "Get in the car, we're leaving." So he's my dad, so I honor that. I get in the car and we leave. And over the course of the day, he shares some information with me, and I had no idea. There's some people in your life that you have that inlet with. Snatch them from the fire. You're allowed to get blunt and real with them. You have that relationship. Don't miss the opportunity. Others, show mercy mixed with fear. So when I read these passages, I get the idea it's different for different people. And the proximity that you have in someone's life, it gives you the opportunity to know the direction to go. God will open doors for you and that person in certain ways and in certain seasons because it's different. But the proximity you have with that person is the important thing. And just focus on the one. If this is overwhelming to you, the one. There was a guy who moved in right across the street when I was a pastor back home. I could look out the kitchen window and see his front door. And he moved in. It was a neat guy. And I was like, that's really close. I should be the one that takes the initiative. So I go over, I introduce myself. We meet. And then it just develops into this friendship. And it's a friendship that I'm kind of carrying the load. And looking around his house a couple of times, I noticed that he's into a couple of things. Swords. And model cars. Any model car guys in the house? Yeah. Okay, me either. All right, but this guy was into swords and model cars. Like, he would buy these swords and stretch them out, put them over the fireplace, hang them on the wall. Then he would buy cases for these model cars. Not my gig, but every time Michelle and I would go out of town, I would look for those. I would look for a sword that looked special. I don't know what a special sword looks like, but I would look for one that was special, or a unique model car, or if we went to some flea market and someone had something, and I would pick up these things, and I'd bring them back, and I'd give them to this guy. Well, this guy had a big problem with alcohol, but that wasn't going to distract me from cultivating a relationship. So bought a few swords, bought a few model cars, and we're about to, in the next few months, move away from Harlan. So I'm really upping the game with this guy and just building into him by being present in his life. Proximity. And we're over at his house one day. It's a little late in the evening, and it's on a weekend, and he's had a little too much. So we start talking through life. Then he says, I need you to leave, but I want you to come back tomorrow when I can have a conversation. So I leave, and I go back the next night. We're just hanging out. There's some sports on the TV, and we're just talking. And he says, I've thought a lot about this, and I want you to know that you've been a really, really good friend. And I want you to know that if you ever need me, I'm here for you. And then he dropped this line. He said, but I'm fully convinced that I'm going to really need you first. There's people in your life just like that. They need you. They need you to be close. They need you to give them some mercy or to snatch them from the fire. They need you to demonstrate mercy mixed with fear. They need you to understand that they're just one person on this planet. But to you, that should be extremely valuable. And you know why? Because your attitude should be the same as that of Jesus Christ, who gave himself up, considered what it was like to be us. And that's the motivation for you and I to look not only to our own interests, but to the interests of that one person you're thinking about. God, we trust you. We trust you with our lives because we're here. And we're giving our best shot at sorting this thing out that we call faith and following you. So we trust, Father, that when topics like making disciples come up, and it's a little confusing because we hear it through the lens of being incarnational or invitational. Well, we trust you, Father, that in moments like these, you will give us a sense of clarity. You'll help us get clear in our own minds about the question of how to even go about this. You've got some ideas for us, or we've had some ideas, but nothing's played out in the past. Well, I pray a fresh prayer, Father, for us, every single one of us, that we'll consider how to make a disciple by being involved in their lives as a first step, that proximity factor, and allow that to change things. And over time, people will be convinced that we really do have a genuine interest in their lives. We're concerned for them. And the relationship just isn't about me. It's about them. And we know, Father, that people feel that. They see it. They experience it. So we're thankful, Father, for the teaching today from your word that reinforces we're not alone in this. And we don't have to save the world. You're the Savior of the world. But we can start with one person. And we can initiate or cultivate that relationship and trust that you'll do a good work. And then when the time is right, individuals will say, you know, I need what you have. And we can help introduce them to you. Father, you're good, and we know that because we're here. And we know that because of Jesus. So as always, we pray and praise you in his name. Amen.